So contrasting with how they treated me and my ex when I first joined to this, I was just kind of surprised. I was like, why are you guys telling me this? Like, why are you guys trying to control who I date and how I date? When he told me initially to suck it up because he didn't want to get between me and my ex. Like, I don't understand. And some of the things I read about cults was that they would always try to control you. Because my roommates, funny enough, they were watching a documentary about NXIVM, and we were having a discussion about NXIVM and talking about how the control is very subtle over time. And that stuck with me in the back of my head. And so I was just kind of like, huh. So that's when I was like, okay, let me go ahead and reevaluate this group again and see if what they have is truly the highest truth. Because if they have the highest truth, it should withstand all scrutiny. Yep. And let's go ahead and start deep diving into the background and what Google has to say and like what other ex-members are saying. Because the fact that they had to tell me don't look them up is kind of a concern.
Do you want to share at this point some of your story?
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm very interested to know how you seem obviously very intelligent and able to and somebody who wants to do their research and wants to think things through. So it is interesting to me to know how you ended up getting mixed up with this group in the first place.
Yeah, so my story was that I was recruited through, well, she's now my ex-girlfriend, but through my girlfriend. So what happened was this, met her on a dating app, and a few months into our relationship, she's like, hey, do you want to join a Bible study? At the time, I was Christian, I was more agnostic, I wasn't really sure of the Christ or anything like that. And in the video of me praising their doctrines, I'm like, yeah, you know, they convinced me of the Bible, stuff like that, right? Anyways, so we start out with just me, my then girlfriend, and a teacher in a mall. And it's just the three of us, and I'll just go ahead and drop some dates. It's from August to about October. It's just the three of us. And I'm thinking to myself, the year's 2018, I'm thinking to myself, okay, so they didn't really teach anything out of the ordinary, no real red flags. They kind of did eventually kind of push to like, hey, what do these parables mean? You know, they were kind of selling me on that. Nothing too bad. I would ask them like, okay, so what's the name of the ministry? I remember not really getting a direct answer, and I would just kind of drop it. So, you know, that was the first red flag, but, you know, I was invited by my girlfriend, and she seemed pretty excited, so what's the worst that can happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, famous last words. So then from October to, it's a year-long class. They don't tell you that, and it goes from once a week, an hour, to twice a week, 3 hours. And so me and my girlfriend, we go to an unmarked building, and that's where the class is at because the teacher invites us to it. So I was just kind of like, hey, this is kind of weird that it's in an unmarked dark building, but okay, whatever. And I kind of brushed that aside because, again, my girlfriend is very excited. And I'm like, okay, sure. You know what? I'm not going to call my girlfriend a liar or anything silly like that. Definitely in the back of my mind, I'm like, this is kind of sus, but that's okay. I'll just continue moving on. So, you know, over time, you know, it's twice a week. And I'm going along. I didn't really believe the Bible that much, to be honest. So I thought to myself, okay, this is a pretty logical way of looking at the Bible, and their teachings seem to make sense. And so, okay, sure, I'll just continue going along with it. Halfway through the class, my girlfriend and I, we break up, and she steps down. And during this time, I'll also give them credit where credit's due. I was asking questions, and I was asking a lot of them. Half the time they would say, hey, not yet. We'll get to it later. And then the other half, they'll be like, oh, well, what do you think? What have you perceived? And, you know, I was like, okay. And from my point of view, I was like, hey, you know what? I'll just give them a chance. I think it's fair for them to build up their argument. Okay, that's a pretty fair, you know, even in like mathematics, you know, you build up You don't go straight to calculus. You need to learn addition, subtraction, and then multiplication and all that stuff, and then you build up, right? So I knew that there was a big build up. And another emphasis I want to make is they didn't make any mention about Shincheonji or their real identities, not even 6 months in.
They were keeping that secret.
Exactly. So I make it all the way through the class. And I did do a little bit of Googling at the end of intermediate, so at the end of Jude. And I found out that they're SEJ, but at this point I'm fully indoctrinated. And I just, I did a brief reading, but I didn't do like a deep dive research on this group. Because what I found out later was psychologically, they implanted a lot of phobias in me. They're like, oh, if you read anything online, they're all liars, slanderers, they're evil people and saying all these horrible things, so I read it a little bit to know like, oh, I'm in an SEJ Bible study, but I still followed through because I thought to myself,
So they will just demonize any outside influence, any person or organization that has any sort of different view or perspective than them, and that's such a useful and obviously terrible and manipulative way to keep you isolated and in their echo chamber.
Exactly. And after this, I was just going to go over the bite info too. Maybe I'll go through my whole story first, and then I'll do the bite info.
Yep.
But yeah, no, that's a perfect analysis. So then I go through Revelation, and so we go through Revelation, and they give you the photo evidence of their fulfillment, their supposed fulfillment. They leave out the important details about like how Monty Lee was involved with the olive tree, or things like that. And I thought to myself, all right, this is where God is. I guess the second coming is real. Jesus is using this guy to, bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. And this is where it really actually becomes sinister. So like you said earlier, half the people in the class who were pretending to be new students and were lying to me about their affiliation with Shincheonji. And it turns out that they were doing thorough reports on conversations that I would have and the other members would have. And then there's this one video that I found to be truly disturbing, which really goes into detail about just how much information this group collects on you. And I'm sending this to you now. 1 second.
So just for clarity's sake, what you're telling me is that you spent a year, is that correct, in this class?
Yep.
And in that class, you were surrounded by several
Leaves.
other, or how many other people would you say there were with you in the class?
What I recall is like by the end of it, there's like probably a class size of like roughly 20 rounding.
20. Okay.
Half of them at least were leaves or people pretending to be first-time students. And during this class, they also throw tests at you. So that means you're studying with these people. And these tests were like, you had to memorize the answers word for word. You even had to get sometimes their grammar right. And otherwise they'll be marked down. And so it's pretty intense. And, so I get really close to these guys. And so half the people in the class were lying to me and reporting on me and collecting information on me, screenshots of private conversations, you name it. And the worst part is that was the moment when I realized that my girlfriend, or my now ex-girlfriend, was a part of this church. And that the people who I viewed as my brothers and my sisters were lying to me about her. And that hurt. And I want to make this clear. I'm not mad at them. I understand why they did. They were sincerely believing that they're just trying to save me. But you can imagine the betrayal of trust. And so what happens next is that you have a Passover where they sell the Passover in Shincheonji is basically you graduate into the church, and that they love bomb you really hard there. They're like, you're a precious first fruit. One of the verses they use is James 1:18. Born again of God's, true seed, and you're a precious first fruit, all that stuff. And I remember, and another important detail to remember is when you join, you're assigned a group, and there's an assistant leader and a group leader. And my assistant leader was the guy who spied on me basically for that class. And so I remember going to leadership at this time and saying, hey, my ex-girlfriend's here. We're a relatively small group in the Seattle branch. can we just clear the air? Just maybe talk about this. This really hurts. And they essentially told me to suck it up. They're like, we don't want to be apart. We don't want to get in between you two. Like, I'm sorry, Chris, but you have to like overcome it, or suck it up. And at the time, I had a subconscious reaction to it where I just didn't trust any of the leadership. And I would try, even though I was fully indoctrinated at this point, I couldn't understand why I didn't trust them. Now that I'm out of it, of course, it's so obvious. Yeah, they lied to you for an entire year. Of course, you can't trust them. And another logical question now that I'm out of it is, okay, so they lie. If they're willing to lie like that and treat you like that for a new member, what else have they, honestly, changed and lied in the past? So, all right. So fast forward. What happened is that's October 2019. I joined this group. And then up until February of 2020, I'm very active, getting little to no sleep. I'm at the church all the time, trying to help out, studying, recruiting, you name it. And then COVID happened. And the interesting thing about COVID is, guess which group accidentally spread COVID in Korea? Our group. So it was our group. We were patient 31, where we accidentally spread COVID. Now, it wasn't intentional, and it wasn't on purpose. We weren't trying to cause the world to end, nothing like that. But when we accidentally spread COVID, we're a secretive group. All of a sudden, globally, everybody knew about us. New York Times was publishing a secretive cult is accidentally spread COVID. And if you Google Shincheonji, that's a lot of articles are about that.
Yep. I remember when that was all kind of popping up online.
Oh, yeah. Especially with the work of World Mission Society. I'm sure it was definitely on your radar, right?
Yep. Yeah, it definitely was.
So at that time, we stopped everything. Like from going basically 7 days a week, it was like once or twice a week, Wednesday and Sunday. And at that time, things weren't that bad, actually. I was studying the doctrines, but I wasn't pressured to do anything. I could breathe and have a normal life. And that was when I made that video of praising the doctrines.
Okay.
That's an important context. Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, because you said that you kind of had that meeting. You obviously had growing concerns. And were asking questions. And then, they sort of responded by telling you to suck it up. So what was it what was going on in your mind at this point that kept you in? Like, why were you, even with all that happening, why did you still decide to remain in SCJ?
Yeah, so that's where, basically, I'll just say the typical thing is I was brainwashed, sure. But there's a few things to kind of take in consideration. I did sincerely believe in their doctrines. I did sincerely think that, they had the highest truth. And I did sincerely think that, and these guys were like a second family to me, a weird manipulative family. But, you spend so much time with them, you get to know them. And then I knew that if I were to leave, I wouldn't be able to have as easy access to them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, it gave me a purpose and community and things like that.
Yep. Okay.
And so, that's a big part of it too. Yep. So that, of course, begs the question, then why did I leave? Right? Because I was fully convinced, and we'll get to that soon. Hyping it up. All right. So
yeah, there you go. Stick around.
Stick around for the next episode. Oh, man. So what happened was this. So I made that video. I'm super happy. I'm a full-time member. I'm being as active as possible. Things started kind of reopening. We started doing evangelizing online. We had Instagram accounts that didn't have any reference to Shicheonji, and we were reaching out to people. I still have the Instagram account I used as evidence of how we didn't pronounce your Shicheonji. And we started recruiting online. And, then we started doing the center classes. That's the indoctrination class. At first it was only Monday and Thursday. So this time I was sitting in on it as a spy, reporting on people. And, and so that happened from basically throughout the year 2020. What happened though was then things started kind of picking up. We did activities, we call it Shining the Light. SCJ had a very bad press media. So to soften the PR blow, we tried to do a lot of volunteer work to show how great we are. So we started doing volunteer work like blood drives, food drives, things like that. And we would always try to reach out to the media. And for me personally, that was very shady and seedy because I'm like, why can't we just do this to bring glory to God? Mm-hmm. Like, why do we, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing?
Right. Don't do your works before others to be seen by them.
Exactly.
Or you have
and
your rewards where they do, yeah.
So that was in the back of my mind. And the next thing then too is that like the thing that really kind of kicked off me starting to do the thorough research was, so in December 2020, I started dating another member. And, you know, like I was happy about it. We went on the date. It was great. We were working on a blood drive together. We got really close. And I said, hey, let's grab dinner. Nothing, you know, too bad. And mind you, at this time, due to COVID, we're meeting online, but it was one of the few rare times that we got to meet in person. Was through that blood drive, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we grabbed dinner and the date went well. So out of joy, I tell people, I have a big mouth. I tell my group leader, my assistant leader, like, hey guys, I'm dating this gal. We're equally yoked. She's in this group. Isn't that awesome? And the reaction was not what I expected. And I was just kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, what? What they said was, so the assistant leader essentially gave me an hour-long speech of how it's better for me to remain single, quoting 1 Corinthians 7, to do God's work. And I was just kind of like, wait, what? Like, you guys told me to suck it up a few years ago, and now you're telling me this? Mm-hmm. And then my group leader, what he said was, he gave me like a very long list of everything that could go wrong between the two of us. And, you know, they were never directly telling me not to date her, but they're making all these barriers and clearly pressuring us into it.
So what was their motivation for that? Like, what was their concern? What were they trying to avoid with you? Like, what were they worried about if you were to date her?
They said that like I was still a spiritual baby, that I was still a newcomer. Mind you, I've been in this for like almost over a year to 2 years at this point, and not including the indoctrination class. And then they're like, you know, they're just like, hey, you know, what if you guys cause spiritual harm? They made an emphasis on maybe you should wait 6 months before dating. And then so the third round was, I had like basically 3 interviews for this. The third round was with the region leader. And what the region leader told me was that I only had 6 months to marry my girlfriend. I'll say Jacqueline. And that I couldn't meet her in person due to COVID. And she and many others strongly recommended us to just wait 6 months because we weren't spiritually ready or mature enough. So contrasting with how they treated me and my ex when I first joined to this, I was just kind of surprised. I was like, why are you guys telling me this? Like, why are you guys trying to control who I date and how I date? When he told me initially to suck it up because he didn't want to get between me and my ex. Like, I don't understand. And some of the things I read about cults was that they would always try to control you. Because my roommates, funny enough, they were watching a documentary about NXIVM, and we were having a discussion about NXIVM and talking about how the control was very subtle over time. And that stuck with me in the back of my head. And so I was just kind of like, huh. So that's when I was like, okay, let me go ahead and reevaluate this group again and see if what they have is truly the highest truth. Because if they have the highest truth, it should withstand all scrutiny. Yep. And let's go ahead and start deep diving into the background and what Google has to say and like what other ex-members are saying. Because the fact that they had to tell me don't look them up is kind of a concern.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that was when I did my lot of research. I found a subreddit, r/Shincheonji. But, you know, there's other ex-leaders and ex-members who aggregate there and they actually talk about their experiences and references and stuff like that with other articles and etc. that speak out against the group. And I started reading some of those academic papers and I started reading and listening to some of the deconversion people or pastors from Korea who had their YouTube videos translated to English or subtitles. And over a period of time, I noticed a few things that are very important. And this is actually very important. I wish I brought this up in the beginning. Revelation 7, and a prophecy was unfulfilled and didn't happen the way it should have, as was taught. What was taught is that in Revelation 7, verses 1 through 8, it talks about the sealing of the 144,000, 12,000 per tribe. So in Shincheonji, what they do is they split up the world into 12 different regions. And each region is a tribe, and they name them after the apostles. So in Seattle, it's John tribe, and the color is emerald green. What's supposed to happen first was there were supposed to be 12,000 sealed members. Sealed meaning that they're basically pastors. And for each one, that makes 144,000. And then after this, the Great Tribulation was supposed to start. What happened in reality was they called COVID-19 the Great Tribulation, they being Mani Lee. And instead what happened was 7 out of the 12 tribes weren't fully sealed. And that one of the tribes didn't even have 12,000 members to begin with. And yet the Great Tribulation began. That's a failed prophecy. And they've actually updated their doctrines to try to counter this. And there's an ex-leader from South Africa who made a very thorough video calling out the updated doctrine, SCJ Skeptic. And he basically tears them a new one by quoting Mani Lee's own book to counter the updated doctrine. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, wait, what else have they changed and updated? And so I started digging. That subreddit helped a lot. There's another member who got a 1985 book that's in Korean, and he lists out some of the changes of their fulfillment. And some of the blogs, like the Truth About Shincheonji blog, actually goes into that too. So I was just kind of like, whoa. So after a lot of thorough research, after reading every verse about a false prophet and how they would act, perfectly lined up with what I saw and happened with SCJ, I realized I needed to leave. And my girlfriend, I talked to her. I was like, hey, here are the verses. Here's what I've concluded. She already wasn't really happy in the group to begin with, to be honest, because at this point, we went from twice a week to like 7 days a week of nonstop activities and going and tests and stuff. And she was feeling burned out. I was feeling burned out. I was getting tired of having to date her in secret. I didn't want a secret girlfriend. I wanted a girlfriend who I'm dating her. Isn't this awesome? And finally, we were both like, hey, you know what? Here are the verses that talk about how a false prophet would act. Let's read Revelation 7. That didn't come into fruition. I don't think this is the highest truth. And so we both left. And yeah.
So when was that you left?
It was in July last summer.
In July. Okay.
Yep.
Wow. So you had been in there by the time you had left. What was the total amount of time that you were a member?
About 2.5 years to 3 years. I didn't include the indoctrination class. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Wow. So you mentioned that watching Kelsey's video, you came across Kelsey, who's a former member of the World Mission Society Church of God.
Yeah.
Again, group that's similar to the SCJ. And so maybe talk about that a little bit. You watched that, and I guess at what point was that in your story when you saw that video, and what impact did it have on you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a long shot. So when I started researching, so I did 6 solid months of online research, because I had to convince myself if this is the truth or not. And I wanted to just be like, okay, I obviously believe it, so I have a bias for it. Let's see what the counter has to say. So that was during that 6-month period. And I actually came across Pastor Mike Winger's video. One of the things that was in the back of my mind was, pastors don't have solid doctrine. So thanks to the YouTube algorithms, I found Pastor Mike Winger. And turns out he has pretty solid doctrine. And actually came across his Trinity video. And his Trinity video I listened to, and I was like, wow, they actually have a real argument. Who would have thought? Crazy. And he even gets into Greek. And I was like, wow, Michael never gets into the Greek. And then I also noticed that he did a thing about World Mission Society Church of God.
Yep.
I looked them up. I'm like, hey, it's another Korean cult. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and read up on what they actually teach. I found their website, listened to the video. I'm like, whoa, this is very similar with the whole parables and everything and control and coercion. And then eventually through the YouTube algorithm, I found your videos with Kelsey. And she was from Seattle and all this stuff too. And I'm like, oh, cool, Seattle, let's go. And her story about how the moment that re-clicked with me was when she was being blamed for not being able to control the kids because they were being rowdy. I remember how I was being basically disciplined because we didn't get media attention, and how essentially it was, the media's team's fault because we were not one with the heavens.
Wow.
And yeah, no, it didn't make sense.
Wow.
And there are other times too during some of the tests where I would get the answer wrong, and he'd be like, "Oh, well, clearly you don't have the right mindset." I was like, "I got a question wrong." Like,
right.
but come on.
So shaming you and making you feel less than for not being spiritual enough, kind of.
Yeah, and on top of that, doing it like, again, there's the 7 days a week. I was feeling really burned out. Another really key important part of my story was, so I had roommates. We're all pretty close, and they would just be like, "Chris, you're locked away in your room all the time. Come out with us, grab a beer with us, grab some dinner with us. We're playing some board games. Get out of your room just for 30 minutes." And some of my close friends would just be like, "Hey, Chris, how much time are you spending with this group?" And I'd be like, "I don't think I'm spending that much time." And they'd be like, "No, dude, you're you're in your room, stuck to your Zoom screen 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, that is kind of weird. Huh." And, that slow, subtle repeating, like, "Hey, Chris, why don't you just like hang out with us? Spend some time with us, just little bits at a time," and just planting that seed. I kind of realized they're right. I am spending a lot of time with this group. When is the last time I've seen my parents? When is the last time I've seen my brother or sister? Because again, when I made the video praising their doctrines, you're only doing it twice a week. So I actually had a life. But at this point in time in my story, I was doing it 7 days a week. So I barely had a social life. And
sorry to cut you off, but the 7 days a week, was that something that was being like demanded of you and required, or was it more just your choice at that point that you wanted to be that heavily involved?
It was more like peer pressure. Again, they never directly tell you what to do. They just peer pressure the heck out of you. So what happened was I was recruiting 2 other people in that indoctrination class on the Tuesday, Friday class. So essentially, originally Tuesday and Friday were like my days off. And then I got sucked into the group. And so I was sitting in the indoctrination class Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Wednesday was the mandatory service. Saturday morning training. And then normally after that, Saturday afternoons, we would have like events to invite people to. And then Sunday would be service. And then there'll also be tests, revelation tests and things like that too. So slowly but surely over time, more and more of my time was just consumed.
Okay. So you mentioned your family. Did being in the group impact your family relationships?
Thankfully, not really. I've always been kind of to myself and doing my own Chris adventures, as I call them.
Mm-hmm.
But my friends definitely notice, like, "Hey, man, like, what's with that Bible study? Like, why do you keep it so down low and secretive?"
Yeah.
That was a question I consistently got.
Okay. So how do you feel like it impacted you as a person? Like, did you feel like it I mean, when I look at what I see in the New Testament, what Jesus taught, it seems like at least one of the core purposes or goals of the gospel is to produce like a inward change, to produce a peace and so on in your life. And so do you feel like you experienced anything like that? Was there any positive change in yourself that you saw, or did you see negative change?
So, okay. At first, I did face great change. And I was like, even though I felt very depressed and crushed, at the same time, I felt like I had a greater purpose. And I was a part of a super cool secret society that gave me a greater purpose. And so I'll talk about some of the positives because I want to be as honest about this as possible. It taught me discipline. It taught me time management. And it taught me that how changing my mindset can truly make things powerful. The thing that tormented me every day was the lying. My parents would innocently ask me, "How's your Bible study? What do you guys learn about?" And I couldn't just tell them the truth. And that tore me apart every single day. And there's also other things where, like, even with some of my friends, like one of my roommates, I finally told, like, this is when I was still involved. He can kind of read my body language. He's like, "Okay, every time we talk about religions and like high control groups, because they watch the NXIVM documentary, you were squirming the entire time. What's going on, Chris? Who is this group?" And I told him, and that felt amazing. And I remember going to many arguments with my group leader and even my assistant leader being like, why can't we just be honest? Ironically, they're doing that now-ish, but they're still kind of doing the secretive, deceptive stuff too. Again, it depends on the region where you're from. But I'm like, why can't we just be honest from the beginning? And that always tormented me from day one.
How did they respond to that?
Again, like, oh, we'll face persecution. People won't listen to us. And, to a Jew be a Jew. And they just kept repeating that over and over again.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you feel like, did you personally, or did you see in others that SCJ relies on shame and fear tactics to control members?
Yeah, pretty much. Like in the moment, I didn't realize it, but there's a lot of shaming, and they call it discipline or earthquakes, And they always make sure they did these things called like mindset trainings. Mindset training. This is back when we were meeting in person. I remember this as if it was yesterday. It had a lot of guilt tripping and shaming involved, where they told us to memorize this verse, and then we would do a bunch of activities. And then at the end of this training, we were supposed to recite the verse in front of everybody. And so there's a room, everybody was lined up doing, when you like wall sit, you know what I'm talking about? So everybody's wall sitting, and then there's different groups. So one group went in the middle of this room, and the leader was like, okay, can you recite this verse? They couldn't. And one of the ladies there started crying. And this is just a specific example of shaming. And there were other moments of shaming that kind of just grossed me out. Actually, one of the people who I basically got into the indoctrination class, she was very wise. She's been around the block. She saw all the red flags. She was kind of curious, so she stuck around and stuff. She also got shamed a few times, and she's like, nope, that's not cool. I have boundaries. I already have a lot of red flags. See you later.
Yeah. Do you have examples of that? Like, are any specific stories?
Yeah. So
that you could tell?
Yeah, one of them was with the person I tried to recruit. She's drinking tea, and she essentially she's drinking tea for her health. And so there would be a lot of passive aggressive comments being like, oh, well, why are you drinking tea before the Lord? Why you wouldn't do that in front of the president? And so this is inside the indoctrination class. The teacher's calling out what I call my fruit in front of the entire class. And so it turns out that my fruit had health problems and she needed to drink that tea. So the teacher did eventually apologize. There are other times where they would kind of do passive aggressive jabs where they're just like, oh, well, this happened to my girlfriend. Oh, well, some of you aren't smiling enough or aren't going to all of your meetings. So they never directly say who it is, but they do it in front of other people. Mm-hmm. And this is like a common theme where, like, maybe, for example, I would kind of like, I remember I asked very specific questions about doctrine changes. Some of them I can't really explain without giving the full context, but I'll just go ahead and list them off. Like one of them being like, there used to be 2 wars in Revelation, and then they updated 3. The Revelation 7, how the sealed 12 tribes are supposed to happen first in the Great Tribulation, things like that I noticed. And I would ask my group leader about that. So one time the region leader came to our group cell meeting and basically threw like a big fit about it. Like, oh, how dare you ask these questions? Is the impression I got. And, yeah, it's just
so he kind of aimed that at you then?
Yeah, they'll deny it, of course, but essentially, yeah. And it's because I was like, this is around the time when I started really being like, do these doctrines truly line up?
Yep.
And yeah.
Okay. So, and I know this probably is going to play into some of what you were wanting to talk about, about the bite model, but I'm wondering if you, and obviously we know the answer to this, but did you experience aspects of mind control in this group? And maybe could you talk some about that?
Yeah, there's a very specific example that comes to mind that kind of shows just how much of a grip they had on me. And so it's February 2020. I'm in this Monday, Thursday class, and they're in Revelation. I'm celebrating a friend's birthday. I'm in a different place. We decided to go to a different town to celebrate the friend's birthday. And I just make a suggestion like, hey, can I leave at 8:30? Normally the classes start at 7 and then ends around like 9:30 or 10. I make the suggestion like, hey, I'm here for my friend. I'm still on the Zoom call, but let me just leave at 8:30. And when I made that suggestion, there was a lot of guilt and shame that was kind of thrown my way. And then eventually at 9 p.m., they said, okay, fine, you can go. And one of my friends, he went in the room during the class and stuff, say, hey, there's a lot of food. There's a lot of food. We want you to join us in the celebration of our friend's birthday. And, what a SCJ member would say is like, oh, well, we didn't physically force you. But what they also drill into every single day is if you disobey the leadership, that's like disobeying God. And you don't want to disobey God. And on top of that, you need a sacrifice for the greater good. So they drill that into you every single day, just like World Mission Society, just like what Kelsey was talking about. And so, yeah, you're right. They don't have a physical gun in their head, but they have a spiritual gun to your head. And it's a concept called spiritual abuse that describes it perfectly.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like you can relate to that term, spiritual abuse? And do you feel like having left, do you see or have you noticed the emotional or mental repercussions of that?
Yeah, the cool thing about the BITE model is that I can apply it to politics, to just societies, to a lot of different things. And honestly, it's just an abusive relationship. That's what it really boils down to. So whether it's with a church or with a religion, even mainstream religions can get pretty abusive. But the thing I liked about the BITE model is that it's a good checklist of, okay, if there's an argument to be made that all religions are cults, sure. But how far down this checklist does it become a healthy religion to a destructive group?
Right.
And the big thing that Stephen Hassan, the BITE model author, would say is deception's at the root of every single destructive group. Mm-hmm. And it's like, wait, how did I get recruited in this? Oh, yeah.
Deception.
So, weird.
Yeah. So did you want to dive in at all to the BITE model or talk a little bit about aspects of that kind of stick out to you?
Sure. How are you feeling? Because I know that it's pretty late for you as well.
I'm great. Okay, I know we've gone for about an hour and 20, so we can wrap up soon. But I can go as long as you're willing to go. So.
With the BITE model, it's definitely so a suggestion for parents and other people who may have a family or friend inside of this group or any high control group. I would strongly recommend that you look into Stephen Hassan's BITE model and battling mind control, because it's a good resource to understand what a cult member is going through mentally. And then it's behavior, information, time, and emotion. So when a group sucks up 7 days of your time, essentially your entire life, the emotion part was that if you leave this group, you basically leave behind a family. And then the information control is, don't Google us. We'll give you the information that you need to know. And then the behavior is, well, are these your will? Is this your will or is this God's will? And so that's how SCJ, in my experience with SCJ, perfectly lined up with the BITE model. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the deception part, right?
Yeah.
And so when a member is confronted with this fact, they're going to dig their heels in if you say, hey, you're in a cult, you need to leave. And so instead, a better way is kind of like what my roommate said. Hey, Chris, you're spending a lot of time with this group. Why don't you come grab, play a board game with us, play some games or whatever, And, and then there's also the idea of basically, as Jesus says, love your enemy, except this isn't your enemy, and to love others. So love the person, respect them, and then gently remind them, hey, you're spending a lot of time with this group, or what do you think about the ex-members, or how much money are you spending with this group? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So asking questions that cause them to do some self-reflection.
Exactly. And because, they keep them so busy, high control groups or cults keep them so busy, they don't have time for self-reflection.
Yeah. So related to the bite model, then you kind of mentioned maybe somewhat of like a spectrum of destructiveness within religious organizations. So what do you think would differentiate, say, like a SCJ with more of what we would maybe both classify as more of a healthy church or religious organization?
So with SEJ, everything is reported and everything's spied on. So, and there's a lot of like internal like hiding and secretiveness, and most importantly, a lot of deception. So that's a big red flag in itself. Another thing is that they always encourage you not to look things up online. They call it the tree of knowledge of good and evil, poison, just like World Mission Society. And other things is that more and more time is committed to this group, and you don't really realize it. And the thing with Christianity that I find appealing is that it's by faith and grace you're saved, versus with SEJ and these other high control groups, it's by a never-ending amount of fear-driven development. That's how you're saved, and by your works. And, it's a very works-based salvation. And so I think those are like a lot of the main pillars that make SEJ very destructive. And the fact is that they're trying to kind of gaslight and sweep under the rug their past crime or their past sins instead of owning up to it. I don't know.
Yeah. So do you then are you having left this group, are you still in a place where you have some sort of faith or relationship with the Bible? What does that look like for you at this point?
Yeah, right now I've slowly reintroduced myself to the Bible and to a more healthy church. And I am definitely doing some research and my own homework and investigation about the early church, things like that. And a lot of Pastor Mike Winger's videos are actually very helpful. But I'm also going to look at the opposing side of like, there's a famous book by Bart, Misquoting Jesus, things like that. And kind of, Byronman. Yep. And, I want to look at both sides. And that's where I'm at right now. And other parts is that really helped me was that when I realized, okay, I need to lead this group, I actually made sure I had a lot of great friends and family who I told and were very supportive. I also hunted down a specialized cult therapist who helped other people either leave abusive religion or high control groups. And I hunted one down, and thankfully I had the resources to afford it. And then I also told my closest friends who I trusted, this is what's going on. So then if I need to initially I'm just like, oh, wow. I felt like the rug was pulled underneath my feet, right? Mm-hmm. So if I needed to call someone, I could. And the most important part is I listened to other ex-members' testimonies, like ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-Mormons, to see what they went through and how they felt. And, there's a lot of like panic and distress and things like that, right? And all these ex-members of these destructive groups felt the same way. So because of that, I was able to mentally prepare myself for what was going to happen. And it made the jump a lot less painful.
Mm-hmm. So, because it wasn't all a surprise. You knew what to expect. Mm-hmm. Okay, so exactly. What are some things that you feel like, and maybe you don't have anything at this point, but what are some things, if you do, that you feel like you are still struggling with after having left, and maybe still... Are there things that you still are processing that you find difficult emotionally, mentally?
Right.
And more, I think the reason I'd ask this is because thinking about the many other people who have had or are about to have a similar experience as you in leaving the group and experiencing the trauma of something like that, of having to separate from something that, as messed up as it is, as bad as it really is, still you this was, like you've kind of alluded to, a family and became your identity as a person, I would assume, became largely wrapped up in your attachment to this group. And so
right.
So kind of with other people in mind who are going to be experiencing that same difficult, experience of having to separate from it. What are some things that you're struggling with, and maybe what advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, so I definitely kind of so in Psalms, there's a phrase called Selah. When you read the book of Psalms, it says Selah a few times. And what it says and what it means is essentially stop and reflect and take your time. The most important thing about leaving this high control group is to take your time when you leave. When you leave, of course, cut them off. There's, you know what I mean? Like basically flee. But be patient with yourself. Forgive yourself. I mean, you have to remember, like with SEJ or World Mission Society, whatever, there's a situation that came up, and it's okay that you fell for this group. Learn from the mistakes, take your time, and breathe. And there's a ex-Unification Church member who's also from Seattle. Hey, let's go figure. She made a very good video talking about how to heal. What she did was she did journaling, and things like that. And for me personally, definitely the psychiatrist, definitely having a strong support network and things like that made the things a lot easier. But other things that I did to help make the jump was I wrote down the reason why I was leaving. And ultimately it was because I realized that it was all a lie. And that it's better to live in an inconvenient truth than it is to live in a convenient lie. And so when I had that realization, I was like, all right, it's time to go. And over the last 6-7 months, whatever, there are days where it was hard, man. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But things have gotten significantly better today than it was when day one or day zero happened, So there is hope. Whether it's in a God, which I still believe in Christ, I still believe Jesus is God, or whether it's in yourself, and there's always going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's hopefully answer your question.
That does. So. That's very good. That's very good. So my last question then would be, what would you say then to people who are still convinced that this is the highest truth?
Sure.
If you had the opportunity to say, something directly to these people, what would that be?
I mean, the first thing is everyone can believe whatever they want. Freedom of religion is a beautiful thing in the US. Second thing isn't it kind of strange that they tell you not to Google anything? And isn't it kind of strange that they have a long history of deception and lying? And, I would strongly recommend read the Bite Model book, read the testimonies of ex-members. And because if this is the highest truth, it should be able to withstand scrutiny. Yeah. And as they're now becoming more open online, and as they're now uploading their videos online, ask yourself, why didn't they do that from the beginning?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great. Great questions. Great overview, I think, that you've given today. So is there any other points you want to make? Anything else you'd like to share?
I think I covered the things I wanted to talk about. I guess I have so many questions for you. How did I do stuff like that?
Yes.
I know you're going to edit the video and stuff too, hopefully. Yeah. Go on.
No, it was great.
I goofed up on the lightning verse though. They might be like, oh, this guy can't even quote the run verse right.
That's fine. That happens all the time. I knew immediately what verse you were referencing and what you meant. So
yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, I obviously had a lot of time to think and process this when I first reached out to you. Thankfully, I just wasn't ready. And when you did reach out to me back, hey, you want to do this? It was the perfect time. Other resources, I strongly recommend, I mentioned the 2 blogs. They're very helpful and go in very good detail. The Reddit is pretty helpful, but Reddit's a forum, so be careful.
Yeah, right. You can get lost in a place you don't want to end up, probably.
Exactly. It's a good community. It's kind of cool to see other ex-members. I did get connected with Kelsey. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
And actually in the church I'm going to, there's actually other ex-cult members from different cults in the area. That helps so much.
Really? That would be nice. Yeah, I get asked a lot about like recommendations for churches from especially members who former members of the WMS. And so yeah, I've considered like starting some sort of online Bible study or something, just because I honestly sometimes I feel nervous to suggest or recommend a church without being able to know, because like even if it's an evangelical church, that oftentimes like I don't necessarily trust evangelicalism enough to just send somebody like that off into a church without me really knowing the people there. And so yeah, that's something I get asked about all the time. And so it would be awesome if there is a place like you're describing where there's ex-members. That's perfect. That would be a perfect atmosphere, I feel like, for
because we understand each other, right? Like and actually like this is definitely something I appreciate with your work and Pastor Mike Winger and all these other guys, even the cult podcast. It's just that like, obviously immediately the first thing people think of cult members is like, oh, you're stupid if you fall for it, you're weak-minded, things like that. Right. And it's just like, I'm definitely a lot more sympathetic to other groups now, or sympathetic, empathetic. I get the two confused. Like people who are in domestic abusive relationships, I used to be like, why did he stay then? But now I actually understand why they stayed. And I now have a deeper understanding of like, just things like that. And even being more acute and aware of manipulation and the importance of boundaries. Yeah. Oh man, if I had my boundary set up pretty much like when I first joined the church, if I had the boundaries like, okay, you guys lied to me and you did all this, doesn't matter if you have the highest truth, see ya, Yeah. But yeah, exactly, I should have just done it. I could go back in time. Yeah. It's just like, if you guys had the highest truth, just be honest. Yeah. They poisoned their own well. They really did, unfortunately.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's yeah, it's just I'm learning more and thinking more about these things and realizing. I think you made a great point that ultimately what this boiled down to was it was an abusive relationship is what you were involved in, and I feel more and more convinced that this exists in so many varieties of religious organizations and denominations and churches, and it's easy to just look at the more obvious examples like the cults, like SCJ or the ones that they're just easier to pick on and easier to point at. But really, I totally agree. Like this is not something that only unintelligent people get duped into joining. This is anybody could get wrapped up in something like this, whether it's an organization or getting wrapped up in a relationship that's has very similar abusive emotional patterns like these cults walk in. And so I definitely agree that and I think you made a great point, just that this is not something to beat yourself up over if somebody does get wrapped up in one of these things.
Yeah. And it's just like, self-forgiveness is a big one. And the best thing about leaving this group was the first Sunday after we left, right? My girlfriend and I just went on a hike. There's a volcano called Mount Rainier. It's a beautiful part of the Cascades. We just took the day off and hiked. And we were just kind of laughing along because, to be fair, I'm a little bit more in shape than her, so I kind of gave her a little bit of teasing about that, But we're just kind of laughing to ourselves. We're just like, wow, we would have not even be able to do this. And I've actually traveled with her. Like, we went to San Francisco. I introduced her to some family. We went to New York recently. We've been driving around the current state, the Northwest. So that includes like Portland and like I haven't gone to Idaho yet, but just small things like that where I don't have to plan my life around another group.
Yeah. Yes.
So refreshing.
Yeah, it's like you lose yourself, like you lose your self-identity in these groups, and you kind of have to put on the hat of a SCJ member, and you have to become this entirely other person and sort of suppress your own goals and desires and passions.
Like, I mean, even before this group, like, okay, one of the good things I got out of this group is I definitely slowed down on the partying and stuff, which is good. And even now I don't go crazy with the partying as I used to, which is really, really good. But even just being sincere and honest with people was something I couldn't do because I always had a hidden agenda trying to recruit them, And so now I'm like taking classes. I am taking a hermeneutics class, and I'm also learning a few languages, learning like Mandarin because I've always wanted to. And, I just get to breathe.
Yeah. And this is something I'll be honest, like I've grown up as a Christian, never been like involved in what would be defined as a cult.
Right.
But I have like more and more, especially over the past handful of years, seen like how, again, it doesn't matter what organization or denomination you're in, like these cult-like tendencies can exist, and these effects, similar effects, can exist in any religious group. And so like it's just been interesting as I've even in many ways like not like abandon my faith, but detach myself from a lot of the like just the assumptions that I've lived with my whole life about like this sort of ideology is the only true ideology. This is the only way to see it. And these set established doctrines that the majority kind of agrees on, and it's the only way to see it. And I've even kind of seen myself like regaining some of my like former just interest in like music and things that I like always, used to enjoy. And I kind of just had even just unconsciously been just suppressing or for whatever reasons, whether thinking that those things are worldly or just evil or a waste of time, whatever. Yeah. And so like, it's been interesting and satisfying too, to just kind of introduce myself, I guess, and kind of go back to some of those things and to realize how in many ways I feel like, I've been sort of, whether it's from the teachers I've listened to or I don't know, I'm not putting blame on any one direction. It's as much my fault for how I've internalized doctrines and as it is anybody else's, but just, I do just think there's maybe more freedom and more, what's the word I'm looking for? Autonomy that we should experience, if these, Jesus is the Christ and
the way I kind of viewed it to justify things too is with Protestant Christianity, it's decentralized. So because it's decentralized, you have a little bit of wiggle room. And ironically, when I had all the answers to the Bible, for example, or at least I thought I did, I was enslaved and not free. But now that, like, they're gonna be like, oh, you're just chasing out the world. I'm like, no, I'm actually pursuing a relationship with Christ right now. And maybe it's not 7 days a week, but like it is more like I get to do it more just breathing. I can read the book of Romans without scramming through all of it, in an hour for a test or whatever. I don't have to read Monty Lee's commentaries anymore. I can read other commentaries and, make a logical conclusion with the best of my ability with the prayer and the Holy Spirit.